God, infinitely loving Lord, Father, send your Spirit upon each one of us gathered here and upon our whole assembly, that we may hang out with you today, that we might experience your presence with a special openness, that we might be open in mind and heart, and ready to receive whatever word you wish to send us. Receive that word and take it in like good soil so that it can bear fruit. We wish, O Father, that your Spirit can use us to be your presence in the world, to one another, and really to this whole world, and as we're talking today, to this whole universe, that you'll be present in us, in our consciousness, in our mind, in our heart, and our love. And may today be a growth in all of this. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Giving talks is not my first vocation. I don't naturally take to it like Thomas or William. They're just happy to be out. Actually, once I get involved with you, I love that part of it, but I don't have that kind of natural native gift, so we will proceed. And I'm thinking we have this lovely topic that Marianne created, Reflections on the Heart of All Creation. It's just, just take that and you can go off meditating for today. And I think if Father Thomas were here, and I have gotten this chair, which is the Father Thomas chair, and you can kind of rock back and forth. Normally I avoid this because it's not the most comfortable and it's not the best for thinking. But I said, maybe Thomas will inspire me, so I'll sit in this. But if it were Father Thomas, he would have a rather poetic, mystical tour right into the center of this question, the heart of all creation. However, you have Joseph here, and I would like to hope that I'm going to affect some possibilities of stirring up within you the material to take you there to that heart and that center. But my goal is much more modest, first off, which is to give you two aspects contained in this much broader picture that might help you on a practical level develop a deeper instant relationship with the heart of all creation, which of course is God, right? Talk about the heart of creation. It's not a beautiful star or anything else. It's God, the Creator, who started this creation and who is the goal of this creation. At the beginning and the end, and of course what we're working with in this prayer is to realize He fills every minute of it, or every second, a nanosecond of this creation is the presence of God. So that's what we're up to here. How do we get doorways into the experience so that we're not just caught up on the superficial level that's always present to us and requires us to act on it, obviously, for our survival on the planet and whatnot. But how do we manage to create doorways into that deeper experience? So that's all I'm talking about at this level is two doorways. The first one that I'll talk about this morning, and a few of you may have heard me talk on this or seen a tape, but I've brought it back out and dressed it up a little for this, which is the cosmos itself as a doorway into this experience of God, into the heart of creation. And the church fathers and mothers had said in various times, God wrote two books, the book of nature and the book of the scriptures. And nature was written before the scriptures. And so nature is a book written by God, drawing us into relationship with God. So what I would hope is, in this few reflections this morning, is to try and just remind you of some of the connective possibilities of this world around us. And right now we're sitting in a very pretty place in that world. This view of Cyprus out here and of this valley that is almost shaped to be like the hand of God holding you. And when I mentioned a sacred valley, there are some people that feel when they drive off that county road and come in, they feel this ridge that runs from the north, east, and south, just open to Sopris, is the hand of God holding us. So I'm just hoping with some of these remarks to enhance whatever experience of that you can take a hold of and take it into the deeper encounter that it leads you to. So that's what's in my mind as I go here. And oddly enough, I want to start with a light story, okay? And I have a reason, but the reason probably doesn't justify it. But the story is this. I hope none of you have heard it before, or you'll bear with it. In a certain town, there was a church that had a very high reputation as having a healing service that actually worked, and people were cured there. And every Tuesday night, they would have one of these services. And on this particular Tuesday night, Leroy came to the service because he had something he wanted prayed for. And he was there, and they start out with hymns, and then scripture readings, and then the minister gives a very devotional talk. And finally the minister says, now any of you who would like to be prayed over, just come forward and form a line here. And Leroy gets up and he gets in the line, and he's sitting right, or standing right there. And finally it's time for Leroy. And the minister says to him, well, Leroy, what can we pray for you? What would you want? And he said, oh, pray for my hearing. And the minister says, oh, come here, Leroy. And he puts one hand on his head near his ear there, and he raises his other hand, and he starts praying up a storm, And everybody else in the church is praying at the same time. It's all going on. And so finally, after a few minutes, the minister steps back and says, well, Leroy, how is your hearing now? And Leroy looks at him and says, well, geez, minister, I don't know. My hearing isn't until next Wednesday. Okay. I wanted to just start there so that I could relax a little. But I do have a bit of a point, which is, our words can mean different things, and different things to different people, just like the word hearing, can mean a hearing judicially or a hearing on the sound level. And so I'll say a few things today, and maybe if we're having talk between us, others will say things, and for us just to be aware that the word might mean different things, and different things to different people. I might use the word evolution, and I'm not sure everybody means the same thing when they say evolution. And maybe somebody doesn't even believe evolution, who knows, but I'll certainly be talking evolution. And it might mean different things. This afternoon I want to talk about meditation. I said this morning I wanted to be on the book of nature. This afternoon I want to look at meditation and how it affects this movement into the heart of the universe, the heart of creation. So just a little word to, if you don't quite get, you maybe just leave a compassionate space in your head and let the word sit there and see what happens towards the end, and not get too caught up in any particular meaning for it. Whatever. So that's my justification for the Leroy story. But it's, anyhow, I enjoy that. Now, what I want to look at first of all this morning with you is the universe story, okay? Because what's being found in cosmology over the last 100 years, and most especially over the last 50 years, is giving us a whole new universe story. And it has lots of implications that scientists all over the world are agreeing on this universe story. One of my sources, and a fellow I enjoy immensely, is Brian Swim rather. He teaches at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. And he's written some books. The Universe Story is one, and The Universe is a Green Dragon is another. And I attended some of his talks when I was on sabbatical in San Francisco. I just liked the guy a lot. But he said, do you realize what we have here? For the first time in the history of the human family, we have one single story of our origin. Until now, we have had various stories in our various cultures and traditions around the world, but they have all been different as to where we come from and what we are. You think about that. Those of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have the book of Genesis. Really, over the last 150 years, more and more people realize that that wasn't a literal story on the creation, but that's still our theological story of the creation. Perhaps Islam follows the same story, I'm not sure. But, all over, and here we are in the Southwest, the different Indian tribes, they all had a story about where we came from, therefore who we are and what we should be doing and how we're getting there. And each one of those stories is still valid in its own way, like Genesis for us. You can keep it theologically. But we all have, over all the continents, all the countries, within at least the scientific world, and really more and more people are drawn into it, a single story of where we come from, and therefore how we've gotten here, and therefore what do we need to do about it, at least on a basic level. So that's kind of brings joy to Brian Swimme. It brings joy to me too, that this idea that now we can all just sit back and listen. So if you don't mind, I want to take some time to just try and tell that story in a very simple and perhaps simplistic mode, but just so we're all on the same page with it and can reflect. And again, what I'm up to here is not a science class by any means. I'm not a scientist. I went to a Jesuit high school. I had 4 years of Latin, 3 years of Greek, 2 years of French, and no science. So here we are. But at any rate, what I'd like you to be thinking about is that this story, this creation, is my story, okay? It seems to me this is the big thing that's happening that's different for us now. And I'll try and say this a little later, and maybe I'll save it till I get there. But our consciousness as a human family is changing over these last 100 years. And our relationship to the earth is changing over these 100 years. And for us, at least those of us that are older, we're having to kind of pick our way along and try and keep up, as it were. For the young generation just coming in, they're picking it up. Not necessarily even consciously. It's just the air they breathe and what they're picking up. And I like to look, what is that, And my example in my mind is this. I began before the world really had computers. And in terms of personal computers, we got one in 1984, when I was the first one with a computer as the bookkeeper here. And that was largely the beginning when people began getting computers, and the internet came in on a practical level a little bit later. And I have to work with all of these instruction books. How do you put more memory chips into this thing? And what do you do with this? And what do you do with that? I even paid $4,000 for an IBM computer that had 2 floppy drives and no hard drive, because that would have been another $1,000. And now for $300, you buy something that's way more powerful than that thing was. But my point is, the kids today are so, I'm not saying they just are learned in it, it's at a different level. Some would say morphogenesis, and I'll get back to that word maybe this afternoon. But they pick it up, and they don't even look at instruction books. And if you're figuring out some gift you got at Christmas and can't even figure out how to run the alarm clock anymore, these kids will just go right through it and give it to you. So that's one little level of it. I'm saying the same thing is happening on the level of our understanding of the universe and our relationship to it. So the younger people have a little different sense than we do of what's going on. And maybe I'll try and come back to that a bit at the end, but just listen to the story and try and get into it and realize we're not talking about something out there, something that they found or they used a telescope to get to or whatever else. They're talking my story and I'm part of this, okay? That's where I'm coming from. So, once upon a time, about 13.8 billion years ago, this whole universe of ours, right, with the billions and billions of stars that are out there, was contained in one tiny speck. A speck so small, smaller than a dust speck, smaller even than an atom, which we can't even begin to see. It's the tiniest thing. And yet this tiniest thing had near infinite energy and infinite heat. Okay? A singularity, they call it. And this is so counterintuitive. You say, come on, this whole mountain and everything was in that. Well, billions and billions of galaxies were in this little speck. And then at some point, this little speck began to expand and to grow and to grow and to grow. Scientists have no idea why it began to expand then, right? That's outside their field. They can only start with beginning plus umpteen nanoseconds later, and they can work everything out from that point, but they don't get what happened there. Huh? Now, we can cheat a little and get the other book out and say, God said, let there be light. Oh, so maybe that's as good an explanation as anything, because they can't come up with anything better at the moment. So at some moment, God said, let there be light, and this little tiny speck began to expand and, as they say, inflate. It had a period of inflation, of expansion beyond possible, and just go out and go out and go out. Now, as it expanded, some of the energy, right, I'm saying it's all energy and heat, some of that converted into matter. And some of us will have heard Einstein say, matter and energy are convertible, interchangeable. E equals mc squared. And we won't carry that further, but that's the reality we're dealing with continually, whether we know it or not. But energy and matter are interchangeable. So that energy began to be present in the form of matter. And the matter collected more densely in some areas, less densely in others. Where it was more densely collected, that began to pull together even, because you got some gravity beginning to act between the little atoms, largely hydrogen, a certain amount of helium, and it began to pull it together, and that began to give us the galaxies, the pockets of stars. Now, the scientists tell us, and they get this with the Hubble Space Telescope, by turning the space telescope to a part of our sky that apparently has no stars at all. And even with smaller telescopes has no stars at all. And then they turn that incredible Hubble telescope toward it and take a very long exposure, and they look at it and say, holy smokes, it's filled with galaxies. It's filled with galaxies all towards the redshift, meaning billions of years ago. And they can push it back almost to this beginning that we mentioned with the Big Bang. And to go back and say, counting, there's this many little spots we see here, and this is only something the size of a dime in the great big sky. There must be 100 billion galaxies. They said, wow, 100 billion galaxies. Now that number's even going up, but we'll be conservative. 100 billion galaxies out there. Now, these 100 billion galaxies, and each one of them, it's this condensing of the hydrogen atoms and gravity pulling them. Well, within those galaxies, again, some areas are more dense and some are less dense. The more dense ones began to really pull together because they were getting closer, and the closer you are, the more gravity pulls. That's the nature of the thing. And it began pulling them together, and then the closer they get, just going higher and higher, they compacted tighter and tighter and tighter. And then something happened, which was there was a flaring forth of nuclear energy, a thermonuclear process happened. They got squished so close together that some of the electrons got separated, and some of the protons actually got pushed together so that hydrogen became helium. And when you have that happening with an electron going, you get incredible energy released. And so what was happening was this nuclear fire started. And when that starts, that's a star. Up till then, you have just a cloud of basically invisible hydrogen atoms, but pushing together and pushing together and pushing together, and they start this nuclear fusion process. And with that, there is an incredible nuclear radiation going out. And with that, that gravity pushing in starts to be balanced by the nuclear energy pushing it out. And that is a star. And we'll come back to this afternoon in a little cheaty section reviewing this, but there's a question that a star is a star as long as it's running that balance. Before we created the balance with having nuclear radiation, it was just a mass of helium, hydrogen primarily atoms floating there. But once it starts compressing like that, then we have a star and it lights up. So this first galaxy we're talking about, there's all these galaxies. First one, a star lights up, and then another, and another, and another, and another, and we begin to get the sky we're looking at. And we can have an idea of this because we just have to go out at night, and unfortunately you've got some cloudy skies, but on a clear night, and you go out here and it's dark, it's mind-blowing. It is so incredibly beautiful. And you see the Milky Way. Now, I was a New York City kid. I didn't know there was a Milky Way till I got out here and looked up one day. We're finishing haying pretty late, and I said, "What's that cloud going across the sky?" And because it was silence, I didn't say the question out loud, and nobody answered me. But that's the Milky Way. So what we see in the Milky Way is what was happening here in the early universe, right? These condensations of stars, beautiful, lighting up the whole world. Now, what's happening is these stars are not just beautiful points of light in the sky. To be very prosaic, they're factories, okay? And then erase that word, it takes the beauty out of it. But they are doing something. These stars are having this nuclear fusion at their center. And that nuclear fusion is changing hydrogen into helium, and then as they go on, helium into carbon, and up the line. So these stars are actually taking the original creation, and as far as we know, the Big Bang only put out hydrogen atoms and 10% helium atoms and just the tiniest bit of lithium. That's all we get from the Big Bang. So everything else we have here has come from from stars, let's say, creating the heavier elements as they go along. And what then happens is this nuclear fusion at the heart of the star, which is at first changing hydrogen into helium and so on, it's using up all the fuel it can reach. And at some point then, the nuclear fire isn't fueled enough, and it starts to die down. And once that's happening, it's lost its ability to balance the gravity that's pushing in on it. It's lost the outer push. And so the gravity just sends all of this hydrogen atoms from the outer part of the star racing toward that center. And somehow they collide in such a way as to set off an explosion that we call a supernova. And that explosion, when a star goes supernova, I think the last one was like in the 80s, and it wasn't in this galaxy, it was a neighboring one, and you had to be in southern hemisphere to see it. But once in a while they come, and then that star takes over the sky. But for the first little bit, that one star is brighter than the other billion stars of the galaxy put together. This incredible explosion of the supernova. And with that, two things are happening. First of all, that explosion is so hot, it creates even heavier materials. And then it sends them out into the universe. So this factory has done its job. It's taken hydrogen and helium and made it into some heavier stuff. Plus, the star is still mostly hydrogen out there. So it's this big cloud of hydrogen, but it has these heavier elements in it. Along comes the same process we just mentioned. This cloud, this nebula of hydrogen comes together and begins, under the force of gravity, slowly come together and push and finally ignite another nuclear fusion, and we have another star born. It's a baby of the one before, and it's a generation later, and it starts with heavier material because the other star gave it some heavier material. And this process goes on and on and on, and we begin to get the heavier materials. And that's important to us because we wouldn't be here without heavier materials. None of us are just hydrogen and helium. You know, we need carbon especially. We need calcium for our backs and bones, and we need all sorts of things. Well, they weren't given us in that first Big Bang. They've been given us by these stars. So that's the gift of this early universe for us. And when it does that, when it sends all this stuff out, what's left behind is just a little residue that is incredibly compacted, either a neutron star or a black hole. That's what's left of a supernova. Maybe we don't need to go into that. But basically everything else has gone out in space to be available for new stars and new universes. Well, not new universes. And what happens then is that heavier and heavier materials are created, and then the potential for some other pieces of our universe to come into play. So if we run the clock ahead, 2/3 of the life of the universe that we know was just this, the creation of new stars with heavier materials. 4.5 billion years ago, there was a supernova in our part of the Milky Way here, and it put out all its materials, and they began to collect into this cloud that got more and more dense, and a new star was formed that we call the sun. Okay. Now this sun had a lot of heavier materials because the materials had been worked over by a lot of supernovas before it got to us. And in this sun, 99.9% of this nebula went into the sun. Okay, just to get an idea of the size of the sun here. There's a little residue that didn't get pulled into the sun, and it formed a ring around it. If you think of Saturn with its rings or something like that, just as an image, there was a ring, I think, what do they call it? A protoplanetary disk, I think is the word, something of that sort. And it's a material floating around the sun. Now, what happens is you have collisions with all this material floating around out there, and they don't have NASA to direct the stuff, you know, it's just banging into each other. And bit by bit, then these pieces bang into each other and stick together, and they get a bigger piece. Well, then that bigger piece has a little more gravity to it. Gravity goes with mass. So you get a little more mass here, a little more gravity, and it starts pulling in bigger pieces and bigger pieces. And finally, this whole thing gets to be big enough that it's forming a sphere. Once you have enough mass, there's enough gravity in this, it pulls things into the spheric shape because that's the most efficient way of compacting material. And this sphere is able to clear out its orbit as it goes around the sun. So it picks up all of the asteroids, all the whatever else. That's one of the definitions of a planet. It's spherical and it can clear out its own orbit. So we're not in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter or something. We're in our own orbit that we've cleared out. So with that, we then have a sun and Mercury and Venus and Earth and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and so on. And all of those planets are less than 1/10 of 1%. 99.9% of the matter went into the sun. So that's how big the sun is. And it needs to be that big because it is our star. All our heat and all our life is going to come from this star. So that's what's going on there. Our own star has this nuclear fusion happening at its core, and it is sending out light. to all, well, light, all the energies. We recognize a certain portion of the electromagnetic wave field from red up to violet, but there's stuff infrared and stuff ultraviolet going on. Our sun is doing that. And it's doing that as a favor to us, okay? Because in order to do that, the sun is burning up about 4 million tons of itself every second in order to send out this incredible energy. Now that gets into a whole other topic. We'll let that part of it go. But here we are on planet Earth 4.5 billion years ago, right? Now, for the first 500 million years of the Earth's existence, it's made up of all these asteroids piling into each other, and so each one of those collisions creates heat. So the early Earth is very hot, so hot that it's totally molten. There is no solid surface to the Earth. For 500 million years. It took 500 million years to cool down enough that you begin to get a crust forming. And then that keeps growing as the Earth cools down. But we have a lot of ways to go before we really cool down. Anyhow. The crust forms after 500 million years. Another 500 million years, and we get the first signs of life on the planet. So we're talking a full billion years from when the Earth formed to when we have the first elements of life. And somehow or other, whatever the building of these little atoms and placing them together, they got the right combination that you had what we would call a living cell, a one-celled particle, or whatever, one-celled animal, a prokaryote. And these could multiply. They could have babies, one form, and those early ones by splitting. And so you began to get life forming 1 billion years after the Earth formed. And then that life formed, and this is a giant whole topic, world subject, it's going to grow slowly. But along the way of growth, and so on, all of which I'm calling evolution, and moves in this direction, there's certain processes that came along that really were a jump ahead. One of those processes came another 500 million years later, and it was photosynthesis. And photosynthesis sounds kind of spectacular, but the mystery it's enclosing is even more spectacular. Plants that were green, right? Green is chlorophyll. Plants that had chlorophyll, to anthropomorphize it, found out that if they held water and carbon dioxide up to the sun's rays could change that water and carbon dioxide into oxygen and sugar. Photosynthesis. Now, that might sound like, well, so what? But all of us need oxygen and sugar. These are the high-powered fuels that run the mammals, and especially the higher mammals. Without that, we wouldn't survive in the early billion years of the place. We needed this photosynthesis to be creating enough oxygen. There's a couple other sources of oxygen, but this is a big one. And also you need the sugar. You know, as much as we're trying to avoid sugar and not get too heavy, without any sugar we turn into just a wisp of a ghost. We need to have calories and so on to build up. So this little process came in and it helped things grow. So at this point, life is going on. There is a process that we see as we look at creation, that evolution moves towards more and more complex entities, complex beings. You know, it starts out with hydrogen, helium, the heavy elements, finally life-giving stuff, and then finally photosynthesis and really complicated processes, and then animal world growing up, one thing or another that was on the planet, going back 3 billion years. And even things way up to and including dinosaurs. You know, where on earth did they come from? But in the evolutionary process, they came along and they ruled during their time. I mean, they were every which kind of dinosaur, vegetarian dinosaurs and carnivorous dinosaurs, and sizes up to 100 feet long and whatever. And they largely ruled. However, this evolutionary process on planet Earth had its ups and downs. had bumps in it, like our own lives. It isn't just a steady progression this way, it had ups and downs. And one of the downs came about 65 million years ago when a giant asteroid came and hit planet Earth right around the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. And when it hit, it no doubt sent out tidal waves and everything else, but the biggest effect was it sent up so much matter into the atmosphere that the atmosphere turned dark for a substantial period of time. And so much of the greenery, which depends on sunlight, went dead. And with that, they're speculating the major die-off of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. We wonder why all of a sudden these things that were ruling the whole planet became extinct. Well, that's the speculation on it. So we here say, thanks be to God for that asteroid, right? Because the thought is mammals could never have evolved while the dinosaurs were ruling. They were just too much competition for the little mammals that were going. It was like being in Jurassic Park without a weapon. So they were never going to go anywhere. But something took care of all the dinosaurs, and something new began to happen. And I don't know how they figure this, but they figure it was a tree shrew that survived the dinosaurs, survived this meteorite hitting the Earth and so on. And from that one animal, we began to get all of the evolution of mammals. So the mammals began to take over the planet after the dinosaurs disappeared. And this went on into development. As you can imagine, you're going to get giraffes and rhinoceroses and God knows what, and you get some monkeys and apes. And then funny thing happens, maybe 200,000 years ago, some of these apes are starting to look a little bit like us when we look back at it and see what goes on with their skeletons and so on. And they get called humanoids. They're like humans. They're not humans yet, but they're like humans. And then, did I say 200? Maybe 2 million years ago, that came into play. Those scientists keep moving those anyhow. But 150,000 years ago, some little branch of this humanoid clan developed into what we would call Homo sapiens. And that's who we are, Homo sapiens. Supposedly wise human, but there we are, Homo sapiens. About 150,000 years ago. I've seen other bigger numbers now that could push it back further. But something incredible happens once you get to Homo sapiens, all right? One could almost say that the whole of this 13.8 billion years of evolution has been heading toward this moment of Homo sapiens. Now, some people think that's speciesism. So you kind of have to watch out whose sensitivity you're stepping on with this. And there's God knows every ism that can be condemned, but speciesism. But I'm going to slide into it. With Homo sapiens, for the first time, we have in this universe, in this cosmos, the ability of the universe itself to be conscious and reflect on, where did I come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? You sometimes look at a cat or dog and think they might be thinking that, but it's not too likely. But with humans, this is the way our consciousness evolved. We can ask these questions. And more than ask the questions, we can actually be grateful. We can say, thank the person who created this thing, or whoever it was, whatever it was. Thank you. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't got this in motion and got us to this point. And so we humans now walk at this level. And what this is saying is that creation can be grateful to God for being here. And it's the human that can give expression to that gratitude. So when we're singing the Psalms, stars and moon bless the Lord, sun and moon bless the Lord, rain and snow bless the Lord. The rain and snow bless the Lord just by being. That's their being in the universe. But we can bring consciousness to it. And we can take the blessing of all these things and we can give it actual response to God. Now, speciesism or not, what I think is that God was looking forward to this moment. And God's real patient, obviously, 13.8 billion years. And maybe there's some other civilizations on other galaxies and whoever else. But at any rate, I'm imagining that God, who is total consciousness, who is mind, who is heart, who is love, was looking forward to having a piece of his creation who could enter into a relationship of mind and heart and love with him, who could respond to him, who could look at him and say, yes. The rock that's falling off Sopris because gravity pulled it, in some sense is saying yes, because it's doing what it's doing. That's so different from the conscious, loving response to us, from us rather. And we who, let me see if I catch this, we who became conscious and are the consciousness of the universe are able to give this back to God with a yes from the center of our hearts and a gratitude that is at the core of our hearts. And the more we can hold on to that gratitude, and I'm hoping something in here gave places for gratitude, the more that we can hold on to that gratitude, the more we have of consciousness of the divine presence gifting us at every moment. Now, there is somebody who came out with a beautiful phrase. The person is Dag Hammarskjöld. Those of us that are a little older remember Dag Hammarskjöld. Others, perhaps. He was the second Secretary General of the United Nations from, I think, was 53 to 61. And quite a brilliant diplomat. He died in a plane crash over Africa trying to create peace in some situation there. People didn't realize the inner life that Dag Hammarskjöld had. He's quite a man of faith. Didn't know that. He was just doing his thing as Secretary General. But when he died, they found his notes. And they realized the inner depth. And it got published in English as Markings. And so Markings, about halfway through, has a special saying. And they say, I haven't read the whole of Markings, I just read that sentence, But the first half is kind of gloomy. It's heavy. I mean, we have the Cold War, we have Russia and the United States like this, we have things going wrong all over Africa and wherever else. So it's going down, and then he hits this sentence in the middle, and from then on, the book is so much lighter. His sentence is, for all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes. I even had a cousin that stitched that as a saying for me, and I have it on the wall. Doesn't that say it all? For all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes. Thanks to this whole thing, thanks to the supernovas that gave us our materials, thanks for all of the life-giving things, and thanks to our great-great-great-grandparents that didn't get killed before our line was able to continue on here, and here we are. So that's a certain attitude of this presence of God. Where we're talking about reflecting on the heart of the universe. I'm thinking we ought to be reflecting with gratitude on this incredible scene. And all of it could have happened or not happened. A twist this way and a twist that way. They sometimes, when they're trying to find life on other planets and speculating whether there's a lot of that out there or very little, they have the Goldilocks effect. So many things had to go right that life could happen on planet Earth. Things you don't even think about. If planet Earth didn't have an iron core, we wouldn't have a big magnetic field around us that protects us from much of the radiation from the sun. We would just all be baked in the sun, but we have an iron core and so on. So just gratitude, you don't have to fill in the details, but gratitude for all that has brought us to this point, this way of being on the planet and being able to enter into relationship with the Creator. Can you imagine that? Talk about at the heart of the creation. We are given the opportunity to be in relation to the Creator and to say to the Creator, thanks for everything, and yes to whatever it is that you are going to be giving us. You know, that's our privilege, that's our being. That's why we're here in this circle, to try and tune into that dimension of who we are and what potential consciousness and love we can be working with. So again, what I'm saying, and I hope it's clear, I'm not trying to give you new information. None of this really, I presume, is new information to any of you. It's what's floating out there. But it's a new way of experiencing it. It's experiencing it not as facts out there, but as a way of living in it and realizing we are part of the story. We are in the very story itself that's happening. Now, I have a quotation from Richard Rohr that I think says it nicely. The book is Naked Now. And he says, just keep breathing consciously in this way, and you will know that you are connected to humanity from cavemen to cosmonauts. You're connected to the entire animal world and even to the trees and plants. And we are now told that the atoms that we breathe are physically the same as the stardust from the original Big Bang. Now listen to this, his last sentence. Oneness is no longer merely a vague mystical notion, but a scientific fact. Right? That doesn't deny the vague mystical notion, which is fine and worked for centuries when people didn't have the science to go behind it. It's there and it's beautiful. But now we have this as a help. That's all I'm saying. This is a help to us on our way to living more and more in that oneness that the mystics came at from their direction. We're able to come at it from several directions. We have the mysticism of the mystics, we have the Gospels, but we also have just looking around us and aware of this whole world as speaking to us of God who wrote this book, this wonderful thing. Let me just read a bit here of my secondary reflections on it. We all come from the same event, and we're all made up of the same thing, the matter that was generated in the Big Bang, the heavier atoms and molecules that were formed in various supernovas, and finally collected in the solar system by the gravity of our sun, our newborn star, and set on a path toward evolution of life and consciousness. It seems that the path of evolution moves toward ever-increasing complexity and ultimately to consciousness. We share this history and we share the very atoms created in the process. And together, we manage or mismanage the Earth's resources and ecosystems and our human relationships on this planet. You know, we all have this one origin with this one universe. When I was a youngster, which is back in the dark ages, way back there, before television, way back. When I was a youngster and somebody would say to me, what is the universe? And I would think it's something out there. It's maybe you go out and look at the sky and the stars, and that's the universe. And it's something separate from me. I'm the subject doing the thinking, and this universe is out there, and it's the object. As I came to know more about this universe, I realized there was no separation. It wasn't I'm a subject and it's an object out there. We are one. We're collected together. I'm formed from the universe, and my atoms are going to go back into the universe and form something more. That's how the thing goes. Whatever happens to me, my atoms are going to get recycled. We are in the unfolding of the universe right now. Now, years ago, years ago, we had a Zen master came and gave us a retreat here. Real Zen master from Japan, Joshu Sasaki. He died some years ago at about 101 or 102. Very fascinating fellow. And he gave us a retreat here at the monastery, and we sent out notices to some of our former brethren and friends of the community that had a real interest in Zen. And we came, and not that we were going to change religion, we're Christian, we're Christ, we're right in here, but we could bring in their insight was the idea. And a word that he was saying over and over again was no subject, no object. When he would give his talks, his teishos, no subject, no object. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And he had different levels of meaning for it. But it was at the core of his message, you know. And I'm trying to say, what on earth is he really talking about? But it's had something to do with this abandoning the separation between me and the universe. Huh? No duality, no separate realities, no separation, no subject, no object. So now, to get practical from that for a second, at this sesshin, which is their word for retreat, I'm there and I'm like, I'm plugged in because I wanted to see, but I hadn't read on Zen. In fact, I don't read very many books at all. Those of you that are close realize it's not worth asking me, did I read that? Of course, the answer is no before you ask the question. But I plug in there, and some of these people had read everything on Zen. And this Joshu Sasaki is in the Rinzai school of Zen, which used koans as a development of the consciousness part. Koans being little questions that don't have simple answers. That's very rough. They're dilemmas, they're enigmas. And so it's to frustrate the mind and push you to an intuitive level different from the mind. So he's giving us koans. And even though it's in silence, you hear a little bit of stuff happening. And I was hearing that these people that were experts in Zen weren't getting their koan, you know. And so they went the whole thing and left at the end and still didn't have their koan, whatever that means. But that probably doesn't mean anything either. But I'm thinking, here I am, I don't know a thing of what's going on, and the Roshi is moving me from little koan to koan, going along here. I think, well, probably thinks I'm the novice master, I ought to know something, so he does this. But they say, you can't fool a Roshi. I said, I think I fooled him. But at any rate, we got what we got out of this thing, okay? And that winter, I was up on retreat, about halfway between here and Sopers. You can see there's a little mesa. We have a nice hermitage there. In those days, we just had the old settler's log cabin, which is pretty primitive. And I was on a retreat there. And it was winter. That's when we take our retreats. We have more time in the winter. In the summer, we're busy on the ranch and all. And I had just cross-country skied up to the edge of the ridge where I had this incredible view of Sopris from half the distance it is here. And a whole valley and all spread out, who knows, 5 or 10 square miles, just sitting there, no human habitation or anything. And I was just drinking it in. It was just beautiful, it was peaceful, it just was what it was, whatever. And drinking it in and allowing it to be, and I don't say I was thinking about it, but in the back of my mind there was a thought, because I had that thought from Thomas Merton, that in us creation can be appreciative of itself. So something like I was saying earlier, Merton was on that. Because the human had evolved to this level of consciousness, this whole piece of creation then could be thanking God. But that was someplace in the back of the mind. But really the mind was basically just there. And finally it got long enough and cold enough that I decided I ought to turn around and head back for the cabin. And as I did that, the thought just flashed through my mind. Joseph, there was no subject, no object. You were just there, and the valley was there, and it was all just one, and you weren't making distinctions. I said, well, geez, maybe the Roshi knew more than I thought. So I'm just giving you this as different entryways into what's happening with, right now we're invited to relate to our universe in a new way, as part of it, as one with it, as caring for it. That's going to be something I'll say a couple words on yet. Because, let's face it, a lot of our human race tends to just use the universe that we have, the resources that we have, with little reflection to, are we using up these resources? Are these renewable resources? Are these anything else? Just here it is, use it, I need it. We're coming to a new sense of this. And it goes with a reverence for creation. It took, what are we saying, 13.8 billion years to get this prize thing here through all of the evolution and processes and experimentation to get this developed, so that we have a little more care for it. That's coming into the picture. What I'm saying is that as we go along with this consciousness of the oneness, of the giftedness of having all of this presented to us, there grows up in us, if you want to call it a sense of responsibility, that might be it. If you want to just say, in love and gratitude, we're moved to do things, but in our world today, we're developing this sense of needing to care for this universe. Because up till now, evolution just happened, and we didn't get a vote on it, right? It just happened. How the I evolved is so incredible, the story of just the I. And none of us were there suggesting what to do to God, It just happened in evolution and came along. But now we find we actually can influence evolution. So far, largely, we can influence it in rather dangerous ways. But we're able to influence evolution. They say that every single day some species is dying. We don't notice it here, and then let's face it, if mosquitoes left, I don't think I'd mind. But what happened is mosquitoes are here because the Earth has experimented and found out it needed mosquitoes to do something. I didn't read up on it to see what it is, but they're doing something. So if they just disappeared, I'd feel good. I don't have to get some off spray on me. But some bit by bit things would be disappearing. I could give stories on that from other things more real, but that's distracting too far. But that is one of the things, is that we can have a beneficial influence because our human family hasn't been all that good in its track record toward the preservation of the environment. And this is serious stuff. And happily, Pope Francis wrote a whole encyclical on it. And it made people around the world kind of sit up and say, oh, look at that. Christians are starting to take this thing seriously too. Up till then we were, you are the masters of the world, go ahead and rule it. Well, now it's like, we better listen to it before we do too much ruling of it, because it's very important. But anyhow, I just want to give one example here of the how we can perhaps get into this process of evolution, because in evolution, as Darwin presents it, it's survival of the fittest. That's how things grow, and then the things that aren't as fit die off, and the things that are more fit go on, and it keeps producing that way. But we can interfere in a good way, seems to me, with evolution, in as much as in our human family, we can question this survival of the fittest. We can say, maybe it's the poor, the weak, the people who are barely able to make it and sustain themselves. Maybe we can intervene to help them so they don't get just pushed down and, as it were, die off. Some places die off. I mean, their age expectation is lower than the expectation of people that have more resources and so on. We can come in and say, okay, survival of the fittest, but we can intervene with a sense of responsibility that all of our brothers and sisters are given some help toward raising their level of human participation in the resources that are available to them. So we start making decisions, to look out, what about those people in Haiti? It's awfully close to us. Their standard of living is so much lower that we can't even comprehend it. What can we do about it? Now, as I understand it, and I've never had a course in it, but survival of the fittest will say, well, if they don't have the ability to make themselves better, they're just going to die off, so there they go. we're saying, no, 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 we can do something about that. We can take the gratitude we have for all that we have been given, and we can turn around and try and help the people who were given less than we were given, for starters. So anyhow, it just strikes me, we have this whole realm opening. Once we open to the understanding of our universe, our evolution, how we got here, the incredible graced position. I haven't even got into the spiritual graces. I'm just talking our world. Huh? The graces we have, how do we share them? How do we move that out? I'll talk about that a little bit later this afternoon. But for now, I'm just saying, okay, we're looking at this beautiful theme, reflections on the heart of creation, union with the Creator. So understanding that this Creator has given us this incredible gift that took 13.8 billion years to evolve to this point where I can sit here and say, thank you, Creator. And yes to what you plan for me. Yes to whatever it is you want me to do, to be a participant with you in creating and helping each of my brothers and sisters. So that's my thought. We've been reading from the book of nature. You're going to have Lectio at some point. You read from the scriptures. But this is just a little touring around the book of nature with the hope that some of it will help to inspire here and there the sense of the presence of God vibrating in every single thing here, in every tree and ground squirrel and whatever else you see. You see the eagles above who are feeding on the ground squirrels and the whole cycle of things. But that all of that will be the presence of God and at the heart of our universe, at the heart of our world. And we say, for all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes.